Howdy folks, Rudrose here, and welcome to the second edition of The Cards That Are Beating You. If you haven't seen the first episode, I'll put a little link here on the screen as well as in the description, and it covers Ruby Sapphire, so go ahead and give that a look if you haven't. Also look forward to my first Disney Lorcana spoiler coming out this Monday, February 17th at 1 p.m. Central Time. I hope you will enjoy it. Today's ink color pairing is Amber and Steel, and specifically, we're referring to the Steel Song version of the deck. Steel Song has pretty much existed since set 1. I think it really came into its own in set 2 when we got cards like Storm Rage On, Strength of a Raging Fire, which were these damage-based songs. So we're going to look at why this deck is so good, and specifically what are the cards in these lists that are beating you and that are making it so difficult to win against this deck. Now, for reference, I have two decks that were played in the top 16 of the North American Championship. This one by Sean Lung, this one by Christopher Baxter. And then we also have a version Frank Karsten played in the Lorcana Cross-Continental Challenge. That is not to say that these decks are perfect or that their ratios are absolutely what you want to play. These are just going to be used for reference so we can show you which cards are as strong as they are, right? Now, if you look at these lists, there is a common theme through all of them, and that is there is one specific aspect of this deck that is beating you, that makes it so obnoxious and so strong and powerful, and why its only true counter is red, blue, or ruby sapphire, which we covered last time. Do you see it? Do you see which card it is? Do you think it's one of these? I'll give you a hint. It's actually a trick question. It's not a single card. It's a mechanic, and that mechanic is singing. Yes, singing is a broken mechanic in this game. Why? Because it essentially lets you cheat ink, and cheating ink is insanely strong. If you look at the Emerald Steel deck from set 4, what was the classic opening? Diablo on turn 1, shift Diablo on turn 2 after you've played down your Bucky, and then often Diablo would sing a song such as Storm Rage On or Sudden Chill. So think of that classic opening. They played one card for 1 ink, then on turn 2, they used 2 ink, which was the old Bucky. Then they shifted Diablo. This is a 3 ink card. Then they would sing a 3-cost song. So that's 3 plus 3 plus 2. That's 8 ink. 8 ink on turn 2. Give that ability to any deck, and it will be amazing. I'm serious. Give any deck the ability to play 8 ink worth of cards on turn 2, and it's going to be way stronger. If you have an aggro deck that no longer has to put out Daisy Duck into Piglet, but can go, oh, actually, here's Daisy, and here's Piglet, and here's my goat as well, and also here's another card, yeah, that's insane. When this deck can put out Cinderella on turn 1, have her sing Storm Rage on turn 2, and then also put Smee out. Smee is 2 ink. This is 3 ink. They're getting to play 5 ink on turn 2. One of the most egregious examples for a long time since set 2 was Queen on turn 1, shift into the big Queen, and then immediately sing Whole New World. A 5-cost character with a 5-cost song. You've spent 10 ink on turn 2. Like, of course that's insane. Of course that's powerful. Again, that's not unique to this deck. If you gave any deck that potential, it would be insanely strong. But that is what singing does. Singing breaks the ink curve and lets you cheat ink in ways you just really shouldn't be able to. This is a pretty common play line in this deck. Cinderella on 1, Ursula on 2, Ariel on 3. Now turn 4 is you can spend 4 ink normally, right? So maybe if you're playing red-blue, you can put out Flaversham. Or maybe if you're playing Ruby Amethyst, you can play a single goat. Or maybe if you're playing green-purple, you put out a single genie. Well, this deck, with that opening line, Cinderella, Ursula, Ariel, can have the Ariel sing Whole New World and then get a whole bunch of brand new cards. Now Ursula gets to sing Along Came Zeus, and now Cinderella gets to sing, take your pick, Storm Rage On, Criminal Mind, Strength of a Raging Fire. Oh, and then you use that 4 ink to do whatever you want. I don't know, jam out 2 Smees, jam out 2 Lilos, jam out 3 Daisies and a Queen. Maybe you just play Naveen and then also do Along Came Zeus. So keep in mind, let's just even exclude the Naveen line. So let's say Ariel, Whole New World, that's 5. Sing Along Came Zeus with Ursula, that's 4, that's 9. Cinderella sings whatever, 3, that's 12. And then let's say you just play Rapunzel out for a 4. And let's say she doesn't even draw you cards. So that's 4 plus 12, 16 ink. 16 ink on turn 4. That's insane. So while yes, I am going to talk about specific cards in this list and what makes it so strong, overall, what truly makes it so strong is the singing mechanic is just absolutely broken. Any deck that can let you play that much ink in a single turn is, of course, absolutely nonsense. Like, there's no cost to it. Yes, you technically have to exert a character, but that is not a cost. That is not the same as paying 2 ink when you are limited with your ink pool. And nowhere is this more apparent than in the songs of this deck. Every single one of these songs, if you actually had to pay the cost written in the left-hand corner for these, I don't have a single problem with any of these songs. I think they're all perfectly balanced, if not fine, if maybe even a little weak, depending. If your turn 5 ink is casting Whole New World, and that's it, that's everything you can spend your ink on that turn, and then your opponent kind of gets to take advantage of it first, that is fine. I have no issue with that card. But when Ariel can just whoopsie daisy tip over sideways, and then you still get to spend all the ink afterwards, that's what makes it absolutely bonkers. So singing as a mechanic is ridiculous. It will always be ridiculous until they somehow change it. I've always thought it was way too free as well. Like, I get that singing is a big part of the Disney pantheon, but it is very weird that you can have characters sing songs that aren't even from their own universe. Like, why would the Queen know A Whole New World? Why would Rapunzel know and then Along Came Zeus? Whatever. So singing as a mechanic is far and away the biggest reason why this deck is so strong. However, of course, this is a segment called the cards that are beating you, so let's look at some of the individual cards that are also just a huge pain in your neck. First, I'm going to start with the songs themselves. As I stated again, I think if you had to spend all of your ink for the turn to cast one of these, I actually don't think these songs are that bad. The problem is, of course, when they come out for free. If you had to wait till turn 3 to cast Storm Rage on, and that's your whole turn, I think that's more than fair, especially for an uninkable card. And in sets 2 and 3, they released songs that deal damage, as well as set 1 with Grab Your Sword. If you notice, since that time, they have not really released any songs that deal damage. Any actions that deal damage are no longer songs, are no longer singable. So in set 1, you had Grab Your Sword. Set 2, you had Storm and Strength. Set 3, you had Zeus. Now, set 4, you did have the Mob Song. However, this one was just so highly costed, and it just wasn't really worth running that you never saw this one. But after this, look at what you see. These are the singable songs in Steel. Resist and Challenging, Banish Items, Can't Challenge, Draw a Card, Resist, Draw a Card. So they very much have moved away from probably realizing what a problem it was that, when you can sing removal-based effects, that's insanely strong and is what makes this deck so powerful. Now, out of all of these, I think the only one that could truly be problematic, even without the singing mechanic, is A Whole New World. There's simply no other card in the game like this. Many other card games have had cards exactly like this. You will commonly hear it referred to as Wheel, based on a Magic the Gathering card called Wheel of Fortune, which does the exact same thing. All players must discard their hands and draw 7 new cards. So this card you could still argue that this is still a problem, even if they can't sing it, because otherwise, this deck doesn't actually have a lot of card draw. Like, if you don't have Whole New World, it has what? Ariel can maybe find a card, but it's always a song. It's never a character. Rapunzel, that's basically it. It's Rapunzel and kind of Storm Rage on, but it's a single card. Whole New World is the reason this deck is able to just completely refill its hand and just keep jamming out the pressure. So I think Whole New World is absolutely an issue, even if it can't be sung. Now, granted, if it can't be sung, I think it becomes a lot more fair and a lot weaker. But of course, we have to take the card as it is. And as it is in its current state, it can be sung and it can be ridiculous. Next is Cinderella. If the singing mechanic wasn't structured the way it was, there would be absolutely nothing wrong with this card. As a matter of fact, it wouldn't be very good. A 1-cost 1/2 that quests for 1, that's not a good stat line. But it has Singer 3, and it puts you into this insane position where, especially if they're going first, and they put a Cinderella out on turn 1, nearly any character you put out in the game will almost assuredly be banished because they almost always have the Storm Rage on. Unless it has more than 2 willpower, that card is going the way of the dodo. According to Dreamborn, these are all the characters that cost 1 that have willpower more than 2, that have 3 or higher willpower. It's a total of 16 cards. And some of these you can't really even count, like the Golden Harp is essentially just going to banish itself anyway if you play it out turn 1. Mulan takes damage, so that one would still get banished. So you scratch off those 2, you have 14 cards. 14 cards that can be put out turn 1 that won't instantly fall prey to a Cinderella who sings Let the Storm Rage On. with over 1,000 cards in the pool, that's just an insanely small number of cards. And out of all these, the only ones that you really want to see play right now are Daisy Duck, for obvious reasons. Maybe Mulan if you're doing a heal deck, but again, that falls prey to it anyway. So you essentially have one card, maybe the Nala, but again, no one's playing this because they think it's a good card. They're probably playing it with the express purpose of, well, at least this way it won't get banished by Cinderella instantly. And since that doesn't use the ink for turn, they get to do that and then follow up with their Lilo or their Ursula or their Smee. And speaking of Smee, let's take a look at that good old pirate here, because this card is just simply insane and overstated, and until something comes out that power creeps it, this card is not going anywhere in any kind of steel deck, because it's just the best body you can put on turn 2. It has the stats of a snake, it quests for 2 lore, which is insane, and its downside can be mitigated, but its downside isn't really even that bad, because if he quests 3 times and gets you 6 lore and then banishes himself, you're okay with that. You would play any 2 costs that said gain 6 lore, banish itself. Anyone would play that. And then sometimes it can even be an advantage because you can then heal it up with something like Rapunzel. So Smee is just insane, and he's one of these cards that's so powerful and so strong. There's just no reason to play any other card in this 2-cost slot over the Smee. Piggybacking off the Smee, I want to touch on essentially how many cards in this deck now quest for 2 lore, which can make this deck not only have this kind of mid-range control aspect to it through its songs. There are plenty of matches I've won with Steel Song by just going aggressive, by just, okay, here's Daisy on turn 1, maybe Cinderella, Daisy turn 2, maybe Lilo, maybe Smee, maybe Piglet, here's Lawrence, here's Rapunzel, here's all these cards that quest for 2, here's Piglet in this version of the list. Here's Robin Hood. Some versions are running this Simba. Gantu quest for 4 lore. There's so many cards in this list that now put on so much lore pressure that they can just win through being aggressive. It didn't used to do that. If you go back to sets 2 and 3 specifically, the amount of high lore cards were very limited. You had what? You had the Shift Robin Hood line, and you had the Smee had just come out, and I think you had Piglet. That was about it. Otherwise, you were running more uninkable cards, like if you wanted to run the uninkable Lilo, the 1 cost. But it was at least, it wasn't that it was slow, but it was slower than it certainly is now. So that even if they were controlling the board with all this songs and tempo and characters, that it was easier to get to your Be Prepared or to get to your higher cost answers, because at least it didn't quest for lore nearly as quickly. But now, with so much 2 lore questers on the board, the deck just pushes and pushes and pushes way faster than it probably has any right to. I have to give a special mention to Robin Hood into the Shift Robin Hood, because this card occupies a very specific space in that when you play this character, specifically Champion of Sherwood, naturally on turn 5, I think this card is absolutely fine. For a 5 cost, I actually really like what he does. I like that he has multiple effects. And he's fine. He has to wait a whole turn to essentially do anything. When you can shift this guy in on turn 3, and not only can you sing one of those songs right away, you can Whole New World if you want, his stat line on turn 3 is insane. A 3/6 stat line on turn 3 is so powerful. Then he punishes you if you go fast, because he wants to challenge your cards, and then he's gaining lore, so he's helping keep up in lore while challenging you. And then if you have to take him out through a challenge, which you probably will, because there aren't a ton of actions that can deal with something with this much willpower, he just gets to draw a card anyway, so then he helps replace himself. So again, Robin Hood is one of these weird cards that his shift is what makes him so insane. Again, play him on turn 5, no issues with this card at all. Shift him on turn 3, especially going first, and you can potentially punish whatever they have out. Like, my goodness, there are very few games I have lost if I'm able to get that Shift Robin Hood line, especially if I punish and eat up the lore on something on turn 3. A card like Pluto I'm going to mention simply because he goes in with the efficiency issue that Lorcana currently has with its removal. And I want to thank the people who pointed out in the Ruby Sapphire video that part of the reason ramping doesn't feel as bad in Magic is because there are removal spells in Magic that are very, very cheap. Look at a card like Infernal Grasp in Magic. This costs 2. This essentially is the equivalent of casting 2 ink in Lorcana. And just destroy target creature, you lose 2 life. Yeah, it always has that downside of losing 2 life, but it takes out anything. It doesn't have a cost restriction, doesn't have a power restriction, a toughness restriction, just says get something off the board. So Infernal Grasp will always take out 1 creature. A card like Pluto makes the efficiency issue that if you aren't specifically playing Steel, so you can damage him first to make him just a 1/5, which is not as big of a deal to deal with, you are almost certainly going to have to run 2 characters into this card to banish it. So now you're having to spend 2 resources on a single card. And when in reality, you need to be hitting all those 2 lore questers. If the Pluto's out on 4, what's he doing? He's protecting the Smee and the Lilo and the Piglet and those cards you need to hit. And then you have to waste 2 challenges just on this guy. Same with Lawrence being a 4/4 on turn 3. Now again, these cards are kind of mitigated when you're running Steel yourself because you can put a little damage on them and then they're not nearly as threatening. Or maybe if you have some like tiny throwaway creature that you can run into them first and then finish them off, then they're not nearly as bad to deal with. But when you don't have that, you have to waste so much on these cards that it becomes an efficiency problem. Ariel has been a mainstay since set 1, and she is not going anywhere. At her best, she essentially draws you a card and then can sing anything in your hand repeatedly, which is so powerful. But it shows you how good this card is that people whiff on their Ariel reveal all the time, and they still pop off and win because a Singer 5 is just that insanely strong. And then if she does get the card as well, my goodness, yeah. I mean, this card isn't going to go anywhere. It has to be power crept. It's just so strong with the singing mechanic and that it can draw you on entry. And it's not even just a straight draw. It's, hey, you get to choose. Sometimes you're forced into a single choice, but sometimes it's like, ooh, do I want the removal in Zeus? Do I want the continued draw in a whole new world? I do want to give a quick mention to Daisy Duck. She goes in with those 2 lore questers and the fact that if your opponent just has the wrong set of cards, the wrong deck type, or they just can't find the answer they normally would have, a 1/4 body to deal with just can be a huge pain in the butt. Now, Daisy's supposed to be mitigated by the fact that she can feed cards into your hand, but she doesn't always, especially if you have an action or location-heavy deck. And the problem is you can still only play so much ink a turn. Again, we talked about the ink cheating earlier. You can have 10 cards in hand, but if you're on 3 ink, it doesn't matter. You're only playing a maximum 3 cards that turn. That's assuming they're all 1 costs. Last, and certainly not least, the card that is beating you in this deck that I think is probably one of the most frustrating is Pete, the game's referee. This card essentially has an effect on your opponent's turn, which goes against pretty much everything Lorcana is supposed to be. Lorcana isn't supposed to have interaction on your opponent's turn. It's you play and then I play. And Pete just throws that out the window. And with no input from you as the opponent, no extra cost, they play a 3-cost 3/3, which is on curve. It's an on-curve statted character that's inkable and just says you can't play any actions till the start next turn. And often the way this deck loses is that it goes wide and then you hit it with a board wipe, like be prepared. And Pete just says, no, you can't do that anymore. Not that many people play grab your sword these days, but if they did, same thing. Nope, you can't do that anymore. A lot of times, the only way to dig your way out of a situation is to use an action. And Pete completely turns that off, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I think that's what's the most frustrating thing about Pete is he really enables this feeling of just like, are you kidding me? There's nothing I can do about it. How many games have we all had where, well, I had the be prepared in hand, but I wasn't allowed to use it thanks to Pete? Did you notice what song hasn't shown up in any of these lists that used to be kind of popular? Oh, that's right. It's Bare Necessities, a card that came out in set 3 that was another way to help mitigate those board wipes. What people used to do is they would whole new world, especially if they're going against a Ruby deck, and then have someone sing Bare Necessities to check for the Be Prepared and try to just get it out of there because that's the only card they cared about. Well, when Pete came out, what do you need Bare Necessities for? Why play a song that will let you just take the card and discard when you can play a character with a body, which means he can challenge, sing, or quest the next turn? And it does the same thing. It essentially discards it by just saying, yeah, you can't even use it. You're not allowed to use it. So Pete is such a pain in the butt, and he is, to me, one of the most feel-bad cards in this deck simply because he creates those situations where you're like, wow, I actually have the answer to what you're doing, but your darn Pete just says, nope, not allowed to. Too bad. And that is Amber Steel Song. These are the cards that are beating you. As long as the singing mechanic exists, as long as all these strong songs exist, this deck is always just going to be a threat, and it's always going to be this just all or nothing deck that when it pops off, and it pops off pretty frequently, just runs you over and makes you feel like you can't do anything. You know, I've heard some players say that Ruby Sapphire kind of developed as a deck because it was an answer to this deck, because a card like Sisu and all the other angles that deck has can absolutely stomp on this deck. But it's really the only one. It's the only deck that consistently can beat up on this one. Ruby Amethyst struggles a lot against it. Other steel type decks can struggle against it. Anything with Emerald is probably going to struggle. Like it's just a pain, and it's not going anywhere. So there you go. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if there are any cards that I didn't mention or give a description to that you think are another reason why this Amber Steel Song deck is so strong, or was there one I mentioned and I forgot an important point about? Feel free to list that in the comments below. I always appreciate reading and responding to your stuff. Check out that spoiler coming Monday, and thank you so much for watching. Let me know which ink colors you'd like to see next on the cards that are beating you. Feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. It doesn't cost anything, and it really makes a difference in the channel with the YouTube algorithm, and I appreciate you so much. Until next time, take care.